Review Session 3, Supply and Demand. Okay, remember that demand is about what consumers want, and it is always down sloping, and it means that as price goes down, people will demand greater quantities of a good or a service. This graph here represents a shift of the demand curve, which we will get to later. On the next slide, there's a correction on the study guide, and we have the reasons for the downward sloping or the downward slope of the demand curve. So move on to where it says supplementary effect. This is wrong. Cross that off and write substitution effect. I'll define it here in a second, but it's one reason that the demand curve is down sloping. So here's what I want you to write under substitution effect. Again, one of the reasons demand is downward sloping. So the idea with the substitution effect is if prices are too high, you can usually substitute the good with something else. So a hot dog can be substituted for a hamburger. So if hot dog prices are too high, you can substitute it for a hamburger. It's only when the hot dog price goes down that you'll buy more hot dogs. Second reason for the downward slope is what's called the law of diminishing marginal utility, which will be reviewed in the next segment or the next review session. That means, and I would write this down, each time you consume an additional good, that yields less satisfaction than the time before. So you're only going to continue to consume a good, meaning moving along the x-axis, if you can get it for a cheaper price. So an example of buying jeans. You're not just going to buy 2 jeans, probably, unless it's buy one, get one free, because the second one was a lower price, you bought the second one. The third reason that the curve is downward sloping for demand is what's called the income effect. As prices go down, it's like all of a sudden you have more money. You don't literally, but the value of the goods or the amount that you have to spend on has gone down, so you have the purchasing power of buying more. So this is important for the AP test. There'll probably be one question about this. Okay, you want to get down these 4 definitions. Complementary good. These are goods that are used together. They complement each other. Substitute goods means they are used instead of each other. An inferior good is a less desirable good. So it is the loops of fruit instead of Fruit Loops. It's the cheapo good. They're not as desirable. Superior good, I would also write next to that, right? Normal good, it's another name for it. It's the preferred good if you have the income. Go back to the complementary goods. Later we'll talk about elasticity, but just as a reminder, the price of a complementary good moves in the opposite direction of the demand for the other good. Example, if the price of one good, ketchup, goes up, the demand for its complement, French fries, a good used with it, goes down. There's an opposite relationship, because if ketchup is more expensive, so are French fries, so you'll demand less of it. The opposite is true of substitute goods. If the price of hot dogs go up, then the demand for hamburgers, the substitute, goes up. So the price of the related good and the demand of the good itself move in the same direction. The elasticity is going to be positive. If you don't, I would take the time to pause this and restate those to yourself and give yourself examples of that again. An inferior good moves, the demand for that good moves opposite of your income. So if you have more income, what happens to the demand of an inferior good? Hopefully you said the demand went down. The more money you have, the less likely you are to go for the cheapo good. So for the superior good, that moves in the same direction as an income change. You have more money, you want more of the preferred good. We now have shifts of the curve. After it says bolded shifts on the study guide, I want you to jot this down. There's a difference between a change in demand versus a change in quantity demanded. Write that down. Difference in change in demand versus change in quantity demanded. Underline the Q for quantity so you see the difference. Which one is a movement along the curve? Hopefully you said change in quantity demanded. Put your finger or a pen up to the original demand curve. If the price of the product itself changes. You're simply moving along the curve. No determinant has changed. Write that down on your sheet next to change in quantity demand. No shift, movement along the curve. The AP test will try to trip you up and say what will cause a change in demand. And then they'll talk about the price of the good itself. Well, that can't be. That would be a change in the quantity demanded. Next to change in demand, write curve shifts. So it's going to move to the left or the right. Okay, all you have to do is look at, for a simple shift, meaning only one of the either supply or demand curve moves, you just read equilibrium. So put your pen, point to the original equilibrium. After the shift, the arrows shift the demand curve to the right, which means it increased. You can tell that your price has gone up along the y-axis and your quantity has gone up. For supply, it's the same thing. All you need to do is look at it from the opposite perspective. You shift the supply curve, which is upward sloping. I realized up in the study guide that on number 1, I didn't identify the 5 determinants of demand. So if you want to think about that, those determinants, what are the things that change? Preferences, so what people like. Expectations, if people expect prices to go up in the future, there's a rush. We got to buy it now, so demand will increase. If they expect prices to drop, they're going to hold out and demand will go down. So you have preferences, expectations, income. Obviously, if you have more income, you'll buy more. Related goods, so that's inferior versus superior goods or complementary versus substitute goods, which we have already discussed. And the 5th determinant of demand, the 5th demand is obviously going to be number of buyers in the market. The more buyers there are, the more likely goods are going to be demanded. Okay, so going back to the graph then. This is easy to read, as I said before, in the graph before, but what if it's complicated? Well, what does that mean? When I say complicated shifts, if that happens, I'm saying both curves are going to shift. Remember, if supply and demand move in opposite directions, what's the question? Q is the question, meaning Q is indeterminate. We can't tell. Think of this like shoestrings. When you pull shoestrings together, you're moving in the opposite directions. We know that when you pull the shoestring, the knot goes down, but it could go to the left or it could go to the right. Look at this example. Here I have a shift in both curves. Demand increased, supply decreased. They moved in opposite directions. Price went up. In this case, it looks like quantity has gone down. If we look at a second example, in this case, same thing. Demand increased, supply decreased. However, I moved the demand curve more than I did the supply curve. Price still went up, but now the quantity is greater. So quantity is indeterminate. You really don't know which it's going to be, but you know that price went up. So if they move in the same direction, it's going to be the opposite. You can trust quantity changes, but price is indeterminate.